The broken-down pickup truck sat steaming on the shoulder of Highway 47, its hood propped open like a desperate cry for help. Steam billowed from the radiator, while the Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty asphalt. Inside the cab, Elena Rodriguez gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white with frustration. She had been driving for 3 hours straight, trying to make it to Phoenix for a business meeting that could change everything, and now this. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 20 feet behind her, mechanic Jake Thompson was loading his toolbox into his own battered truck when he spotted the stranded vehicle. His 8-year-old son, Tommy, sat in the passenger seat, nose buried in a comic book, completely oblivious to the world around him. Jake had been hoping to get home early today, maybe catch a baseball game on TV with Tommy before bedtime, but he couldn't just drive past someone in trouble. That wasn't who he was. Elena stepped out of her truck, shielding her eyes from the glaring sun as she surveyed the damage. She knew nothing about engines, nothing about radiators, nothing about anything mechanical. All she knew was that she was stuck in the middle of nowhere with a meeting in 2 hours and no way to get there. Her phone showed no signal naturally, and the nearest town was 15 miles in either direction. Jake pulled up behind her truck, his emergency flashes blinking. He climbed out slowly, grabbing his toolbox from the bed. Tommy looked up from his comic book, curious about the delay. "Dad, why are we stopping?" "Someone needs help, buddy," Jake replied, closing the truck door gently. He approached Elena with the cautious manner of someone who had learned that not everyone appreciated unsolicited assistance. "Having some trouble?" Elena turned toward him, taking in his appearance. He was tall and lean, with calloused hands that spoke of years of honest work. His dark hair was peppered with early gray, and his brown eyes held a kindness that she hadn't expected from a stranger on a desert highway. His clothes were clean but worn, and there was something about his quiet confidence that immediately put her at ease. "My truck just started overheating," Elena explained, gesturing helplessly toward the steaming engine. "I don't know anything about cars, and I have an important meeting in Phoenix in 2 hours." She paused, studying his face. "I don't suppose you know anything about engines?" Jake smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "I might know a thing or two. Mind if I take a look?" Elena stepped aside gratefully as Jake approached the open hood. He leaned in, examining the engine with the practiced eye of someone who had spent countless hours diagnosing mechanical problems. Tommy had climbed out of the truck and was now standing beside his father, peering into the engine compartment with curiosity. "What do you think, Dad?" Tommy asked, his voice filled with genuine interest. Jake pointed to various components as he spoke. "Well, Tommy, looks like the radiator hose has split. See that crack right there? That's letting all the coolant leak out, which makes the engine overheat." He glanced at Elena. "Good news is it's fixable. Bad news is you're going to need a new hose and some coolant." Elena's heart sank. "How long will that take? And where am I going to find parts out here?" Jake straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag from his back pocket. "There's an auto parts store in Milfield, about 20 minutes back the way you came. I can patch this temporarily to get you there, but you'll need a proper repair before you can make it to Phoenix safely." Elena checked her watch, calculating the time. Even with a temporary fix, she would never make her meeting. Months of preparation, networking, and planning were about to go down the drain because of a split radiator hose. She felt tears of frustration welling up in her eyes. "Hey," Jake said softly, noticing her distress. "It's going to be okay. Let me see what I can do." Jake returned to his truck and retrieved a roll of electrical tape and a small bottle of radiator stop leak from his emergency kit. Tommy watched intently as his father worked, asking questions about each step of the process. Jake explained everything patiently, turning the roadside repair into an impromptu lesson about automotive systems. "This is just a temporary fix," Jake told Elena as he worked. "It'll get you to town, but you'll need a proper repair before any long drives." He glanced up at her. "What kind of meeting were you heading to, if you don't mind me asking?" Elena hesitated. She had learned to be cautious about sharing too much personal information with strangers, but something about Jake's demeanor made her feel safe. "It's a business opportunity," she said finally. "Something I've been working toward for a long time." Jake nodded, not pressing for details. He understood the weight of missed opportunities better than most people. As a single father trying to build his own automotive repair business, he knew how hard it was to get ahead when life kept throwing obstacles in your path. "All done," Jake announced, closing the hood and wiping his hands clean. "This should hold long enough to get you to Milfield. Murphy's Auto Parts on Main Street will have what you need." Elena reached for her purse, pulling out her wallet. "How much do I owe you?" Jake shook his head. "Nothing, just helping out a fellow traveler." Elena stared at him in disbelief. In her world, nothing came free. Every favor had a price. Every kindness came with strings attached. "I insist on paying you something. You've saved me from being stranded out here." "Really, it's fine," Jake said, loading his tools back into his truck. "Just pay it forward sometime." Tommy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, can we follow her to make sure the fix holds?" Jake looked at Elena, then back at his son. The kid had a point. A temporary repair on a desert highway wasn't something you walked away from without ensuring it worked. "Would you mind if we followed you to town, just to make sure everything holds together?" Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. "I would actually appreciate that very much." The small convoy made its way slowly toward Milfield, Jake keeping a careful distance behind Elena's truck, watching for any signs of trouble. Tommy sat beside him, still asking questions about automotive repair and why people helped strangers on the highway. "Because that's what you do, Tommy," Jake explained. "When someone needs help and you can provide it, you help. That's how communities work, how people should treat each other." Tommy nodded solemnly, absorbing the lesson. "Is that why you always stop to help people?" Jake glanced at his son, remembering all the times they had been the ones needing help. After his wife, Sarah, had passed away 3 years earlier, neighbors who brought casseroles, teachers who stayed late to help Tommy with homework, strangers who had shown kindness when he felt most alone in the world. Sometimes we need help. Sometimes we give help. It all balances out in the end. Milfield appeared on the horizon, a small desert town that had seen better days. Main Street was lined with buildings that spoke of a more prosperous past, but Murphy's Auto Parts sat right where Jake had promised, its neon sign flickering in the afternoon heat. Eleanor pulled into the parking lot with Jake right behind her. She climbed out of her truck, checking her watch again. Her meeting was definitely a lost cause now, but at least she wasn't stranded on the highway anymore. "Thank you," she said as Jake approached. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate this." Jake nodded. "Murphy's a good guy. He'll take care of you." He paused, then added, "If you need any help with the installation, I'd be happy to stick around." Elena looked at him curiously. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" Jake glanced at Tommy, who was exploring the small selection of toys in the auto parts store window. "Nothing that can't wait. Besides, Tommy's enjoying the adventure." Inside Murphy's Auto Parts, the owner greeted Jake like an old friend. "Jake, what brings you to my neck of the woods?" "Roadside Rescue," Jake replied, introducing Elena. "She needs a radiator hose for a 2018 Silverado." Murphy nodded knowingly and disappeared into the back room. Elena found herself studying Jake more closely while they waited. There was something about him that intrigued her. He moved with quiet confidence, spoke with genuine warmth, and treated his son with the kind of patience that suggested he was used to being both mother and father. "You're not from around here," Elena observed. Jake shook his head. San Diego originally, moved to Milfield about a year ago to start over. He didn't elaborate, but Elena sensed there was more to the story. Murphy returned with the radiator, hose, and a jug of coolant. This should do the trick. You want me to install it, or are you handling that yourself, Jake? Elena looked between the two men. I can pay someone to install it. I don't want to impose any more than I already have. Jake waved off her concern. It's a 15-minute job. No sense paying someone when I'm already here. Nay, as Jake worked under the hood, Elena found herself in conversation with Tommy, who had appointed himself her tour guide to the world of automotive repair. The boy was bright and articulate, with an easy smile that reminded her of his father. Do you help your dad with his work? Elena asked. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. Sometimes. I'm learning to be a mechanic too. Dad says if you can fix things, you'll never be out of work. Elena smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. That's very smart advice. Dad's the best mechanic in town, Tommy continued proudly. He can fix anything. Jake emerged from under the hood, having overheard the conversation. Tommy's a little biased, he said with a grin, but I do my best. Elena watched as Jake tested the repair, checking for leaks and ensuring everything was properly connected. His movements were efficient and practiced, and she found herself wondering about his story. What had brought him to this small desert town? What kind of life was he trying to build here? All set, Jake announced, closing the hood. That should get you to Phoenix and back without any problems. Elena pulled out her wallet again, but Jake was already shaking his head. The parts are on Murphy, he said, and the labor is on the house. Elena stared at him in amazement. I don't understand. Why won't you let me pay you? Jake shrugged. Because you don't need to. Sometimes it's that simple. As they prepared to part ways, Elena felt an unexpected reluctance to say goodbye. These two strangers had turned what could have been a disaster into something else entirely. They had shown her a kindness she wasn't used to experiencing, and she found herself wanting to know more about their story. Jake, she said, as he was loading Tommy back into their truck, I know this might sound strange, but would you and Tommy like to have dinner sometime? I feel like I owe you at least a meal. Jake paused, considering the invitation. It had been a long time since anyone had invited him anywhere, and longer still since he had considered accepting such an invitation. But there was something about Elena that intrigued him. She was clearly successful, well-dressed, and from a different world than his. But there was also a vulnerability in her eyes that spoke to something he recognized. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You don't owe us anything, he said finally, but if you're asking because you'd like the company, then yes, Tommy and I would like that very much. Elena smiled, feeling something shift inside her chest. I'm asking because I'd like the company. Oddby. They exchanged phone numbers, and Elena promised to call once she had rescheduled her Phoenix meeting. As she drove away, she found herself thinking about the mechanic and his son, wondering what their story was and why she felt so drawn to finding out. Jake watched her truck disappear down the highway before turning to Tommy. What do you think, buddy? Think we'll hear from her again? Tommy grinned. I hope so, Dad. I like her. Jake nodded, surprised to realize that he hoped so too. It had been a long time since he had allowed himself to hope for anything beyond the next day's work and the next month's rent. But something about Elena had awakened a possibility he thought he had buried with Sarah. As they drove home to their small apartment above Jake's automotive shop, neither father nor son could have imagined that this chance encounter on a desert highway would change both of their lives forever. Elena Rodriguez, was not just another stranded motorist, and the dinner invitation she had extended was about to become the first step in a journey that would transform everything they thought they knew about second chances and new beginnings. The sun was setting over Milfield as Jake and Tommy arrived home, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the windows of the small town's modest buildings. Jake's automotive shop occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse with their apartment upstairs. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and it represented the fresh start Jake had been trying to build since Sarah's death. Tommy bounded up the stairs ahead of his father, chattering excitedly about their adventure. "Dad, do you think Elena will really call? She seemed really nice." Jake unlocked the apartment door, stepping into the small but tidy living space. "I don't know, Tommy. People say a lot of things they don't mean." But even as he said it, Jake found himself hoping that Elena would follow through. There had been something different about her, something that made him want to believe that not all promises were empty ones. Tommy was already at the kitchen table, spreading out his homework, while Jake started preparing dinner. It was their evening routine, one of the many small rituals that had helped them build a life together after Sarah's passing. As Jake chopped vegetables for their simple meal, he found his thoughts drifting back to the woman they had helped on the highway. Elena Rodriguez was clearly from a different world than theirs. Her clothes were expensive, her truck was new, and she spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to success. But there had been something in her eyes, a loneliness that Jake recognized because he had seen it in his own mirror for the past 3 years. "Dad?" Tommy's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Yeah, buddy?" "Why did Elena seem so surprised that you helped her for free?" Jake paused in his vegetable chopping, considering how to answer. Tommy was 8 years old enough to understand some things about the world, but still young enough to believe in the basic goodness of people. Jake wanted to preserve that innocence while also preparing his son for reality. "Some people aren't used to getting help without having to pay for it," Jake explained. "In some places, in some jobs, everything has a price. Elena probably comes in from that kind of world." Tommy frowned, trying to process this information. "That sounds lonely." Jake smiled at his son's insight. "Yeah, Tommy, I think it might be." As they ate dinner together, Jake found himself wondering about Elena's story. What kind of business meeting had been so important? What had brought her to Arizona? And where was she going next? He realized he knew almost nothing about her beyond the fact that she drove a truck and had been kind to his son. The phone rang. Just as they were finishing dinner, Jake glanced at the caller ID, not recognizing the number. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. "Hello? Jake, this is Elena from the highway today." Jake felt a small surge of surprise and pleasure. "Elena, I wasn't sure we'd hear from you. I wanted to call and let you know that the repair held perfectly. I made it to Phoenix without any problems." She paused. "I also wanted to apologize for missing our dinner plans. I had to reschedule my meeting for tomorrow, which means I'm staying in Phoenix overnight." Jake found himself disappointed, though he tried not to let it show in his voice. "That's okay. Business comes first." "Actually," Elena continued, "I was wondering if you and Tommy might be free this weekend instead. I'll be driving back through Milfield on Saturday, and I thought maybe we could have lunch together." Jake glanced at Tommy, who was watching him with obvious curiosity. "Hold on a second." He covered the phone with his hand. "Elena wants to know if we'd like to have lunch with her on Saturday." Tommy's face lit up. "Yes. Can we, Dad?" Jake smiled at his son's enthusiasm. "We'd like that," he told Elena. "Great. I'll call you Saturday morning to confirm a time and place." Elena paused again. "Jake, thank you again for today. You and Tommy turned what could have been a terrible day into something much better." After they hung up, Jake found himself looking forward to Saturday with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. Tommy was already planning what he would tell Elena about his school, his friends, and his dreams of becoming a mechanic like his dad. Saturday morning arrived, with the kind of clear, bright sunshine that made Arizona beautiful. Jake and Tommy had spent Friday evening cleaning the apartment and discussing where they should take Elena for lunch. They had settled on Rosie's Diner, the town's most popular restaurant and the closest thing Milfield had to fine dining. Elena called at 10 o'clock as promised. "I'm about an hour outside of town. Is noon still good for lunch?" "Perfect," Jake replied. "We'll meet you at Rosie's Diner on Main Street. You can't miss it." Elena arrived precisely at noon, pulling into the diner's parking lot in her now perfectly running truck. Jake and Tommy were waiting outside, both dressed in their best clothes. Tommy had insisted on wearing his newest jeans and a button-down shirt that Jake had bought him for school picture day. Elena stepped out of her truck and Jake was struck again by how different she looked from anyone else in Milfield. She was wearing a casual but clearly expensive dress, her dark hair pulled back in a style that was both professional and elegant. But when she smiled at Tommy, her face transformed, becoming warm and approachable. "Tommy!" she greeted the boy, with genuine pleasure. "How are you?" "I'm good," Tommy replied enthusiastically. "Dad and I picked the best restaurant in town for you." Elena laughed. "I'm honored." As they entered Rosie's Diner, Jake noticed the curious glances from other patrons. Milfield was a small town where everyone knew everyone, and Elena was clearly not from around there. But Rosie herself, a woman in her 60s who had been running the diner for 30 years, greeted them warmly and showed them to a corner booth. "So," Elena said, once they had ordered, "tell me about Milfield. What's it like living here?" Tommy launched into an enthusiastic description of their town, explaining about his school, his favorite places to play, and the small adventures he and his father shared. Jake watched Elena's face as Tommy talked, noticing how intently she listened and how genuinely interested she seemed in their simple life. "What about you?" Jake asked when Tommy paused for breath. "What brings you to Arizona?" Elena hesitated, and Jake recognized the careful consideration of someone who was used to guarding personal information. "I'm in real estate development," she said finally. "I'm working on a project that could bring some new opportunities to this area." Jake nodded, not pressing for details. He understood the need for privacy, especially in business matters. But he found himself curious about what kind of development Elena was involved in and how it might affect their small town. Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Elena asked about Jake's automotive shop, and he found himself describing his dreams of expanding the business, maybe hiring an apprentice, creating something that Tommy could be proud of. "It sounds like you're building something important," Elena observed. "Not just a business, but a legacy." Jake shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just trying to make an honest living and give Tommy a good life." Elena studied him across the table. "That's more than most people manage to do." As they finished lunch, Tommy excused himself to use the restroom, leaving Jake and Elena alone. For the first time since they had met, the silence between them was comfortable but charged with unspoken questions. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said finally. Jake nodded. "What happened to Tommy's mother?" Jake had been expecting the question, but it still hit him like a punch to the chest. "Car accident," he said quietly. 3 years ago. Tommy was 5. Elena's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult." Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Even after 3 years, talking about Sarah's death was still painful, but there was something about Elena's quiet compassion that made it easier to bear. "Is that why you moved to Milfield?" Elena asked gently. "Partly," Jake admitted. San Diego had too many memories. Tommy and I needed a fresh start, somewhere we could build a new life without constantly being reminded of what we lost. Elena reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. For what it's worth, I think you've done an amazing job. Tommy is a wonderful kid, and it's clear he adores you. Jake felt something warm spread through his chest at her words. It had been a long time since anyone had told him he was doing a good job as a father. Most days, he felt like he was just trying to keep his head above water, making it up as he went along. Tommy returned from the restroom, breaking the intimate moment, but not the connection that had formed between the two adults. As they prepared to leave the diner, Elena surprised them both with an invitation. "I have to ask," she said. "Would you two like to take a drive with me? There's something I'd like to show you if you have time." Jake glanced at Tommy, who was nodding eagerly. "Sure," he said. "We've got nowhere else to be." Elena smiled mysteriously. "Good. I think you'll find this interesting." They climbed into Elena's truck, with Tommy chattering excitedly in the back seat about their adventure. Elena drove them out of town, taking a winding road that led into the hills overlooking Milfield. Jake had driven this road before, but never with a destination in mind. After about 20 minutes, Elena turned onto a dirt road that Jake had never noticed before. It led to a plateau overlooking the entire valley, with views that stretched for miles in every direction. At the center of the plateau sat a small abandoned house, its windows boarded up and its paint peeling from years of desert sun. Elena parked the truck and climbed out, gesturing for Jake and Tommy to follow her. They walked together toward the edge of the plateau, where a magnificent view of the valley spread out below them. "This is incredible," Jake breathed, taking in the panoramic vista. "I had no idea this place existed." Elena smiled, but there was something wistful in her expression. "This property has been in my family for 20 years, she said quietly. "My grandfather bought it with dreams of building a house here, but he never got the chance." Jake stared at her in surprise. "Your family owns this land?" Elena nodded. "My grandfather was a dreamer. He bought properties all over the Southwest, always planning to build something special. This was going to be his retirement home, the place where he and my grandmother would spend their golden years." She paused, looking out over the valley. They both passed away before they could make it happen. Tommy was exploring the area, around the old house, completely captivated by the adventure. Jake watched him for a moment, then turned back to Elena. "So what are you going to do with it?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. I've had developers interested in buying it, people who want to turn it into a subdivision or a commercial development. The meeting I was driving to in Phoenix was with investors who want to build a resort up here." Jake felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. A resort would change everything about Milfield, bringing crowds of tourists and transforming the quiet desert town into something unrecognizable. "And you're considering it?" Elena looked at him, and Jake saw conflict in her eyes. "It would be a lot of money," she said, "enough to set me up for life, to never have to worry about financial security again." Jake nodded, understanding the temptation. Financial security was something he dreamed about every month when the bills came due, every time Tommy needed something that stretched their budget. But, Elena continued, "standing here now, looking at this view, thinking about what my grandfather dreamed of, I'm not sure money is the most important thing." Tommy came running back to them, his face flushed with excitement. "Dad! Elena! You have to see the old house. It's like a treasure hunt." Elena laughed at the boy's enthusiasm. "Would you like to explore it?" They spent the next hour wandering through the abandoned house, with Elena sharing stories about her grandfather's plans for the property. Despite its current condition, Jake could see the potential in the structure. The bones were good, the location was spectacular, and with the right vision, it could be transformed into something truly special. As the afternoon sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, they sat together on the house's old front porch, looking out over the valley. Tommy had found a comfortable spot between Jake and Elena and was pointing out landmarks in the town below. "There's my school," he announced proudly. "And there's Dad's shop." Elena smiled at the boy's excitement, but Jake could see that she was wrestling with something. The weight of decision hung over her like a cloud, and he found himself wanting to help her find the answer she was looking for. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said quietly. Elena nodded. "What do you think your grandfather would want you to do with this place?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "He would want it to mean something," she said finally. "He would want it to bring joy to people, to create something beautiful and lasting." She paused, looking out over the valley. "I don't think a resort was what he had in mind." As they drove back to town, Jake found himself thinking about the afternoon they had shared. Elena had trusted them with something deeply personal, had shared not just her family's land, but her family's dreams. It was a level of intimacy that surprised him, and he found himself wondering what it meant for their growing friendship. When they reached Milfield, Elena walked them to Jake's truck, which was parked outside the diner. The sun had set, and the small town was settling into its evening rhythm. Streetlights were beginning to flicker on, and Jake could see families inside houses, sharing dinner and the quiet moments that made up a life. "Thank you," Elena said, "for spending the afternoon with me. It helped me think through some things." Jake nodded. "Thank you for sharing it with us. That's a special place." Elena smiled, but Jake could see that she was still wrestling with her decision. "I have to go back to Phoenix tomorrow for another meeting, but I was wondering, would it be okay if I stayed in touch, called occasionally to see how you and Tommy are doing?" Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest. "We'd like that." Eleanor hugged Tommy goodbye, promising to call soon. As she drove away, Jake and Tommy stood in the parking lot, watching her taillights disappear into the night. "Dad?" Tommy said quietly. "Yeah, buddy?" "I really like Elena. Do you think we'll see her again?" Jake put his arm around his son's shoulders. "I hope so, Tommy. I really hope so." As they walked toward their apartment, Jake found himself thinking about the choice Elena was facing. He understood the lure of financial security, the temptation to take the safe path that would guarantee a comfortable future. But he also understood the value of dreams, the importance of honoring the people who came before you, and the legacy they left behind. What Jake didn't know was that Elena Rodriguez was about to make a decision that would change not just her life, but his and Tommy's as well. The woman who had seemed like a chance encounter on a desert highway was about to become the catalyst for a transformation that none of them could have imagined. The seeds of something extraordinary had been planted on that plateau overlooking Milfield, and they were about to bloom into possibilities that would reshape everything Jake and Tommy thought they knew about second chances, family, and the power of dreams to change the world. 3 weeks had passed since Elena's visit to the plateau, and Jake found himself checking his phone more often than he cared to admit. She had called twice, brief conversations that left him wanting more. The first call had been to let them know she was back in California handling business matters. The second had been to ask how Tommy was doing in school. Both calls had felt too short, too careful, as if Elena was holding something back. Tommy asked about Elena daily, wondering when she would visit again. Jake didn't have an answer, but he found himself hoping it would be soon. Life had settled back into their routine of school, work, and evening dinners, but something had changed. The apartment felt quieter now, and Jake caught himself staring out the window of his shop, watching the highway for trucks that might belong to Elena. On a Wednesday morning that started like any other, Jake was replacing the transmission in Mrs. Peterson's ancient Honda when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Elena's number, and Jake felt his pulse quicken as he answered. "Jake, it's Elena. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Never a bad time," Jake replied, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "How are you?" "I'm good, actually, I'm great." There was something different in Elena's voice, an excitement that hadn't been there before. "Jake, I made a decision about the property, and I was wondering if you and Tommy would like to be part of it." Jake felt his stomach flip. "What kind of decision?" "The kind that's better explained in person. I'm driving through Milfield tomorrow morning. Would you have time to meet me for coffee?" Jake glanced at his appointment book. Thursday mornings were usually slow, and he could easily rearrange his schedule. "Of course, what time?" 9 o'clock at Rosie's? "We'll be there." After hanging up, Jake found himself unable to concentrate on the transmission. Elena's voice had carried an energy that suggested something big was about to happen, but he couldn't imagine what it might be. When Tommy got home from school that afternoon, Jake told him about Elena's call. "She's coming back?" Tommy's face lit up with excitement. "Did she say what she decided about her grandfather's land?" "She wants to tell us in person," Jake replied, but she sounded happy about whatever she decided. Tommy spent the evening speculating about Elena's news, his imagination running wild with possibilities. Jake found himself caught up in his son's excitement, though he tried to temper his own expectations. Elena's world was so different from theirs that whatever she had decided might not affect them at all. Thursday morning arrived grey and overcast, with clouds promising rain later in the day. Jake and Tommy arrived at Rosie's a few minutes early, claiming their usual corner booth. Elena arrived precisely at 9, but she wasn't alone. A man in his 50s followed her into the diner, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of expensive suit that marked him as someone important. Elena approached their table with a smile that seemed to light up the entire restaurant. "Jake, Tommy, I'd like you to meet David Chen. He's an architect from Los Angeles, and he's going to help me explain what I've decided to do." Jake shook hands with David, immediately liking the man's firm grip and direct gaze. David had the quiet confidence of someone who built things, who turned dreams into reality. Tommy studied the newcomer with the unabashed curiosity of an 8-year-old. "Are you going to build something on Elena's land?" Tommy asked as they settled into the booth. David smiled at the boy's directness. "That depends on whether your father thinks it's a good idea." Jake looked between Elena and David, confusion evident on his face. "I'm not sure I understand." Elena leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. "I decided not to sell to the resort developers. Instead, I want to honor my grandfather's original vision, but with a modern twist." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I want to create a community workshop and learning center, a place where people can come to learn practical skills, where families can work on projects together, where knowledge gets passed down from one generation to the next." Jake stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "That sounds amazing, but I still don't understand what it has to do with me." David opened his briefcase and pulled out a set of architectural drawings. "Elena told me about your automotive expertise and how you taught your son while helping her with her truck. We're designing a facility that would include an automotive training center, a woodworking shop, a metalworking space, and classrooms for various trades." Elena reached across the table and touched Jake's hand. "I want you to run the automotive program. I want you to teach people what you know, to help them learn skills that will serve them for life." Jake felt the world tilt on its axis. "Elena, I appreciate the offer, but I'm just a small-town mechanic. I don't have any teaching credentials or experience running programs." You taught Tommy everything he knows about engines, Elena pointed out. You explained every step of the repair process when you fixed my truck. Teaching isn't about credentials, Jake. It's about knowledge, patience, and the ability to help people understand. You have all of those qualities. David spread the architectural drawings on the table, pointing to various sections of the proposed facility. We're planning a state-of-the-art automotive bay with lifts, diagnostic equipment, and space for 12 students at a time. The program would serve everyone from teenagers learning their first trade skills to adults looking to change careers. Tommy leaned over the drawings, his eyes wide with wonder. Dad, look at all this space. You could teach so many people how to fix cars. Jake studied the drawings, seeing the vision that Elena and David had created. It was ambitious, comprehensive, and unlike anything that existed in their part of Arizona. But it was also overwhelming, a responsibility that seemed too large for someone like him. I don't know, Elena. This is a huge undertaking. What if I'm not the right person for the job? Elena's expression grew serious. Jake, 3 weeks ago you stopped on a highway to help a complete stranger. You didn't ask for payment. You didn't expect anything in return. You just helped because that's who you are. That's exactly the kind of person I want running this program. David nodded in agreement. I've designed learning centers all over the country, and the most successful ones are always run by people who genuinely care about passing on their knowledge. Technical skills can be taught, but you can't teach someone to have a generous heart. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Elena and David explaining their vision in detail. The learning center would be called the Heritage Skills Institute, honoring Elena's grandfather's memory while serving the broader community. They plan to offer programs in automotive repair, carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, and various crafts. The goal was to create a place where practical knowledge could be preserved and shared. The automotive program would be the anchor, Elena explained. Cars are something everyone needs to understand, at least basically. We'd offer everything from basic maintenance classes for car owners to comprehensive training for people who want to make automotive repair their career. Jake found himself getting caught up in the excitement despite his reservations. What about funding? A project like this must cost a fortune. Elena smiled mysteriously. My grandfather was more successful than most people knew. When he passed away, he left me more than just land. He left me the means to make his dreams come true and the responsibility to use that gift wisely. As they prepared to leave the diner, Elena made one more proposal that left Jake speechless. There's something else I'd like to discuss. The old house on the property, my grandfather's unfinished dream home. David thinks it could be restored and expanded into a beautiful residence. I was wondering if you and Tommy might be interested in living there while you run the automotive program. Jake stared at her in disbelief. Elena, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't possibly accept something like that. It wouldn't be charity, Elena said firmly. It would be part of your compensation package. The program director needs to live on site to handle emergencies and security. Besides, Tommy would have acres of safe space to explore, and the house has the most beautiful view in the county. Tommy tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, can we at least go look at it? Elena and David exchanged glances, and David nodded. Why don't we drive up there now? I'd like to show Jake what we have in mind for the renovation. An hour later, they stood in the old house that had captured Tommy's imagination weeks earlier. David moved through the space with professional confidence, pointing out structural elements and explaining how the house could be expanded and modernized while preserving its character. The bones are excellent, David said, running his hand along a wall. Your grandfather chose his contractors well, Elena. This house was built to last. Elena watched Jake's face as David described the renovation plans. The house would be expanded to include 4 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, and a large family room with panoramic windows overlooking the valley. A workshop space would be added for Jake's personal projects, and the entire property would be landscaped with native plants that could thrive in the desert climate. "It's incredible," Jake admitted, standing in what would become the living room. "But Elena, this is too much. I'm not sure I deserve something like this." Elena stepped closer to him, her expression earnest. "Jake, you deserve this and more. But this isn't just about what you deserve. This is about what the community needs, what my grandfather would have wanted, and what feels right to me." Tommy had found his way onto the renovated front porch, where he stood looking out over the valley with an expression of pure wonder. "Dad, look at this view. We could see everything from up here." Jake joined his son on the porch, taking in the spectacular vista. Milfield spread out below them like a painting, with the desert stretching endlessly beyond. It was the kind of view that made you believe in possibilities, in dreams that could become reality. Elena and David joined them on the porch, and Elena pointed to a flat area about 100 yards from the house. "That's where we'd build the Heritage Skills Institute. Close enough for easy access, but far enough away to give you privacy when you're not working." David unrolled another set of drawings, showing Jake the proposed layout of the learning center. The automotive bay would be the largest single space, with room for 12 workstations and all the equipment needed for comprehensive training. Adjacent spaces would house classrooms, a tool library, and offices for instructors. "We're planning to break ground in 6 months, Elena explained. The renovation of the house would happen simultaneously, so everything would be ready at the same time. The first classes could start a year from now." Jake felt overwhelmed by the scope of the project and his potential role in it. "Elena, I need some time to think about this. It's not just about me anymore. I have to consider what's best for Tommy." Elena nodded understandingly. "Of course, this is a big decision that affects both of your lives. Take all the time you need." Tommy, who had been listening to the adult conversation with growing excitement, couldn't contain himself any longer. "Dad, this sounds amazing. We could live in this cool house, and you could teach people about cars, and I could help." Jake smiled at his son's enthusiasm, but the weight of the decision pressed heavily on his shoulders. "It does sound amazing, buddy, but it's a big change from the life we've built in town." As they drove back to Milfield, Jake found himself torn between excitement and anxiety. The opportunity Elena was offering was beyond anything he had ever imagined for himself and Tommy, but it also represented a complete transformation of their lives, a leap of faith that seemed both thrilling and terrifying. That evening, after Tommy had gone to bed, Jake sat on the small balcony outside their apartment, looking out over the quiet streets of Milfield. His phone rang, and he was surprised to see Elena's number on the caller ID. "I hope I'm not calling." "Too late," Elena said. "I wanted to make sure you didn't feel pressured by anything we discussed today." "I don't feel pressured," Jake replied. "Overwhelmed, maybe, but not pressured." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask what's making you hesitate?" Jake considered his answer carefully. "I keep wondering why you're doing this. We barely know each other, Elena. 3 weeks ago, you were a stranger on the highway. Now you're offering to change my entire life. I guess I'm having trouble understanding your motivation." Elena sighed softly. "That's a fair question. The honest answer is that meeting you and Tommy reminded me of something I had forgotten. When you stopped to help me, when you refused to take payment, when you treated Tommy as if his questions mattered, you showed me what my grandfather always talked about. Community, people looking out for each other, values that seemed to be disappearing from the world." Jake listened, hearing something in Elena's voice that he hadn't noticed before, a loneliness that matched his own. "I've spent the last 10 years building a successful business," Elena continued. "I've made money, established myself professionally, achieved everything I thought I wanted. But I've also become isolated, surrounded by people who only care about what I can do for them. When you and Tommy welcomed me into your afternoon, when you shared your lunch and your stories without expecting anything in return, it reminded me what I was missing. Jake felt something shift in his understanding of Elena's offer. So this isn't just about honoring your grandfather's memory. No, Elena admitted, it's also about creating the kind of community I want to be part of. The Heritage Skills Institute isn't just a business venture for me, Jake. It's a chance to build something meaningful, something that brings people together around shared values and common goals. Jake found himself moved by Elena's honesty. And you think I'm the right person to help you build that? I think you're exactly the right person, Elena said firmly. You have the technical skills, the teaching ability, and most importantly, the character that this project needs. But more than that, I think you and Tommy could be happy here. I think this could be the fresh start you came to Arizona to find. After they hung up, Jake sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking about Elena's words and the choice before him. The safe path would be to stay in Milfield, continue running his small shop, and maintain the modest but stable life he had built for Tommy. The risky path would be to accept Elena's offer and leap into an unknown future that promised both tremendous opportunities and significant challenges. When Jake finally went to bed, he knew what his decision would be. But first, he needed to have a serious conversation with Tommy about what this change would mean for both of them. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, but Jake wanted to make sure Tommy understood the magnitude of what they were considering. The next morning, over breakfast, Jake broached the subject carefully. Tommy, I want to talk to you about Elena's offer. If we decide to do this, it would mean leaving our apartment, leaving Milfield, starting over in a completely new place. Tommy looked up from his cereal, his expression serious. Would we still be together? Of course we'd still be together, but everything else would be different. New house, new job for me, maybe a new school for you. Tommy considered this for a moment. Would we still help people who need their cars fixed? Jake smiled at his son's question. Yes, but in a different way. Instead of just fixing cars for people, I'd be teaching other people how to fix cars. Kind of like how I taught you. Tommy's face brightened. So you'd be like a teacher? Something like that. Tommy finished his cereal, clearly thinking hard about their conversation. Finally, he looked up at his father with the earnest expression that always melted Jake's heart. Dad, do you want to do it? Jake realized that his son's question cut to the heart of the matter. Yes, Tommy, I think I do want to do it. It scares me a little, but I think it could be something really special. Tommy nodded solemnly. Then I think we should do it. Besides, Elena needs us. She looked kind of lonely when she talked about her business. Jake was struck by his son's perceptiveness. Tommy had picked up on the same loneliness in Elena that Jake had sensed during their phone conversation. You're right, buddy. I think Elena does need us, and maybe we need her too. That afternoon, Jake called Elena with their decision. We'd like to accept your offer, he said simply. Tommy and I are ready for a new adventure. Elena's voice was filled with joy and relief. I'm so happy, Jake. I think this is going to be something wonderful for all of us. As Jake hung up the phone, he felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation about the path they had chosen. He was leaving behind the safety of the known for the uncertainty of the unknown, but for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like he was moving toward something instead of running away from something. Tommy whooped with excitement when Jake confirmed their decision, already making plans for their new life on the plateau. Dad, can we get a dog? Elena's house has so much space for a dog. Jake laughed at his son's priorities. We'll see about the dog, Tommy. First, we need to figure out how to move our whole life to a new place. The next few weeks passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Elena and David worked with incredible efficiency, coordinating contractors, ordering equipment, and handling the countless details required to transform their shared vision into reality. Jake found himself impressed by Elena's business acumen and her ability to manage complex projects while still maintaining the personal touch that had drawn him to her in the first place. Elena visited Milfield twice more during the planning phase, each time bringing updates on the progress and seeking Jake's input on the automotive program. They spent hours together discussing curriculum, equipment needs, and teaching methods. Jake discovered that Elena was not only intelligent and capable, but also genuinely interested in the educational aspects of the project. "I want people to leave your program with more than just technical skills," Elena explained during one of their planning sessions. "I want them to have confidence, problem-solving abilities, and the kind of work ethic that will serve them in any career they choose." Jake found himself increasingly excited about the teaching opportunity. "We could structure it like an apprenticeship program," he suggested. "Students would start with basic maintenance and gradually work up to complex repairs. By the end of the program, they'd be ready for entry-level positions at any automotive shop." Elena nodded enthusiastically. "And we could partner with local businesses to provide job placement assistance. The goal is to give people real opportunities, not just certificates." As moving day approached, Jake felt a bittersweet mixture of anticipation and nostalgia. Milfield had been their home for over a year, the place where he and Tommy had begun to heal from Sarah's death. Leaving felt like closing one chapter of their lives and opening another. The night before the move, Jake and Tommy walked through their small apartment one last time, remembering the quiet moments they had shared there. "Are you going to miss this place?" Jake asked his son. Tommy nodded thoughtfully. "A little, but I'm more excited about our new house than sad about leaving this one." Jake smiled at his son's resilience. "You know what, buddy? I think you're right. Sometimes you have to leave good things behind to make room for great things." The next morning, Elena arrived with a moving truck and a team of professional movers. Jake was touched by her attention to detail and her determination to make the transition as smooth as possible for him and Tommy. She had even arranged for their few pieces of furniture to be professionally cleaned and for Tommy's bedroom to be set up exactly the way he wanted it in their new house. As they drove up the winding road to the plateau for the last time as visitors, Jake felt a sense of coming home that surprised him. The renovated house rose from the desert landscape like something from a dream, its clean lines and large windows, perfectly complementing the natural beauty of the surroundings. Elena had kept her promise about preserving the house's character while modernizing its amenities. The result was a home that felt both timeless and contemporary, a place where a family could build a life while staying connected to the land and the sky. Tommy raced through the house, claiming his new bedroom and marveling at the view from every window. Jake followed more slowly, taking in the craftsmanship and attention to detail that had gone into every aspect of the renovation. This wasn't just a house, it was a home designed specifically for their needs and dreams. Elena found Jake standing in what would be his workshop, a spacious room adjacent to the main house that was equipped with professional-grade tools and ample workspace. "Do you like it?" she asked, though Jake's expression had already given her the answer. "Elena, this is incredible. I don't know how to thank you." Elena smiled, but her expression was serious. "You don't need to thank me, Jake. You're giving me something much more valuable than I'm giving you. You're helping me create something meaningful, something that will outlast both of us." As the sun set over their new home, Jake and Tommy stood on the front porch, looking out over the valley where the Heritage Skills Institute would soon rise. Elena joined them, and for a moment they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Milfield twinkle in the distance. "Tomorrow we start building something new," Elena said softly. Jake nodded, putting his arm around Tommy's shoulders. "Tomorrow we start building our future." None of them could have imagined how profoundly that future would exceed even their most optimistic expectations, or how the bonds they were forming would transform not just their own lives, but the entire community they were about to serve. The phone call came at 6 in the morning, jarring Jake from deep sleep. Elena's voice was strained, barely controlled panic bleeding through her usual composure. "Jake, I need you to meet me at the Institute immediately. We have a serious problem." Jake dressed quickly, his mind racing through possibilities. Construction had been completed 2 weeks ago, and they were just days away from welcoming their first group of students. Everything had been progressing smoothly, almost too smoothly. He should have known something would go wrong. Tommy was still asleep, so Jake left a note explaining where he had gone and drove through the pre-dawn darkness to the Heritage Skills Institute. Elena's car was already in the parking lot, along with 2 vehicles he didn't recognize. Through the windows of the main building, he could see lights on in what should have been an empty facility. Elena met him at the entrance, her face pale and drawn. The county inspector was here yesterday for the final certification. He found code violations that could shut us down before we even open. Jake felt his stomach drop. What kind of violations? Electrical and ventilation issues in the automotive bay. According to the inspector, the electrical load calculations are insufficient for the diagnostic equipment, and the ventilation system doesn't meet current standards for enclosed vehicle work areas. They walked together toward the automotive bay, where Jake could see 2 men in hard hats examining the newly installed equipment. Elena introduced them as Gerald Murphy, the county building inspector, and Tim Richards, an independent electrical contractor. She had called for a second opinion. Gerald Murphy was a thin man in his 50s, with the demeanor of someone who took his job very seriously. He looked up as Jake and Elena approached, his expression neutral, but not unfriendly. "You must be Jake Thompson," Murphy said, extending his hand. "I've heard good things about the program you're developing here." Jake shook hands, trying to read the inspector's mood. "What exactly are we dealing with, Mr. Murphy?" Murphy gestured toward the electrical panels that served the automotive bay. The original electrical design was based on standard automotive repair shop requirements, but some of the diagnostic equipment you've installed draws more power than was calculated. We're talking about potential fire hazards if the system gets overloaded. Tim Richards nodded in agreement. "The wiring itself is quality work, but the capacity isn't sufficient for the full equipment load. We'd need to upgrade the main service panel and run additional circuits to bring everything up to code." Elena closed her eyes, and Jake could see her calculating costs and delays in her head. "How long would that take?" 3 weeks minimum, Richards replied. "Maybe 4, depending on how quickly we can get the materials and schedule the electrical utility to install a larger service connection." Jake felt the weight of disappointment settling over him. They had 23 students enrolled for the first session, scheduled to begin in 8 days. Some had already given notice at their current jobs, others had arranged childcare, and several were traveling from neighboring towns. Postponing the opening would create a cascade of problems that might be impossible to resolve. Murphy continued his explanation, moving to the ventilation system. The ventilation issue is more complex. Current codes require a specific air exchange rate for enclosed spaces where vehicles are running. The system you have installed meets the specifications that were in effect when construction began, but the codes were updated 6 months ago. Elena stared at the ventilation ducts running along the ceiling of the automotive bay. What would it take to upgrade the ventilation? "Major modifications," Murphy admitted. New ductwork, larger fans, additional exhaust ports. We're talking about a complete redesign of the system. Jake walked over to one of the workstations, running his hand along the lift controls that he had tested dozens of times over the past weeks. Everything about the facility was perfect, except for these two critical systems that could prevent them from opening. "Mr. Murphy," Jake said, turning back to the inspector, "is there any way to get a temporary operating permit while we make the necessary upgrades? We have students who are counting on this program to start their careers." Murphy considered the question carefully. "I might be able to issue a conditional permit if you can demonstrate that you have immediate plans to address the violations and that you can operate safely in the interim. But it would require significant restrictions on how you use the facility." Elena stepped forward. "What kind of restrictions?" "Limited occupancy, no more than 6 students at a time in the automotive bay, no extended engine operation without additional portable ventilation, and you'd have to provide documentation of your upgrade plans within 2 weeks." Jake and Elena exchanged glances. 6 students at a time would mean running 4 separate sessions instead of 1, dramatically increasing the cost and complexity of instruction. But it was better than cancelling the program entirely. "We'll take the conditional permit," Elena said firmly, "and we'll have the upgrades completed as quickly as possible." After Murphy and Richards left, Jake and Elena sat alone in the empty automotive bay, surrounded by the equipment and workstations that represented months of planning and preparation. The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared disappointment and the weight of decisions that needed to be made. "How much is this going to cost?" Jake asked finally. Elena pulled out her phone and opened a calculator app. "The electrical upgrade will run about $40,000. The ventilation system will be closer to $60,000. Plus, we'll lose money operating at reduced capacity while the work is being done." Jake whistled softly. "That's $100,000 we hadn't planned on spending." "I have the money," Elena said quietly. "That's not the issue. The real problem is whether this is just the beginning. What if we fix these problems and then discover other issues? What if the county keeps finding new reasons to delay our opening?" Jake heard something in Elena's voice that he had never detected before. Doubt. Elena had been the driving force behind the Heritage Skills Institute from the beginning, her confidence and determination carrying them through every obstacle. Seeing her question, the project shook him more than the inspector's report. "Elena," he said, "do you think someone is trying to sabotage the institute?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know." Gerald Murphy seemed genuinely concerned about safety, not like he was looking for reasons to shut us down. But the timing is suspicious. These code changes happened months ago, but nobody mentioned them during construction. Jake stood and walked to the large windows that overlooked the valley. Milfield spread out below them, a small community that had embraced the institute and was counting on it to provide opportunities for their young people. The thought of disappointing them, of proving the skeptics right, was almost unbearable. "We can't give up," he said, turning back to Elena. "Too many people are depending on this." Elena looked up at him, and Jake saw a flicker of her old determination returning. "You're right. We've come too far to quit now." She stood and began pacing, her mind clearly working through solutions. "We'll operate under the conditional permit while we make the upgrades. It will be more challenging, but we can make it work." The next week was a blur of frantic activity. Elena coordinated with contractors to begin the electrical and ventilation upgrades, while Jake restructured the curriculum to accommodate smaller class sizes. They worked 18-hour days, managing construction workers during the day and planning lessons late into the night. Tommy had been remarkably patient with the crisis, understanding that his father needed to focus on saving the institute. But Jake could see the strain affecting his son. who had been looking forward to watching the first students learn in the facility he had watched being built. 3 days before the scheduled opening, Elena approached Jake with another complication. "I just got off the phone with our insurance company. They won't provide coverage for student instruction until all the code violations are resolved." Jake felt his heart sink. "So we can't actually teach anyone, even with the conditional permit?" "Not in the automotive bay. The insurance liability is too high." Elena sat down heavily, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Jake, I think we need to postpone the opening until all the upgrades are complete." Jake stared out the window, watching construction workers installing new electrical panels. After everything they had been through, after all the promises made to students and families, they were going to have to delay the program that had become his life's work. "What about the students who have already committed?" he asked. "We'll have to contact each one individually, explain the situation, and hope they can wait another month." Elena's voice was flat, drained of the enthusiasm that had carried them through months of challenges. That evening, Jake sat on his front porch with Tommy, both of them unusually quiet. The boy had overheard enough conversations to understand that the Institute's opening was in jeopardy, and his disappointment was evident. "Dad, are you going to have to find a different job?" Tommy asked. Jake put his arm around his son. "I don't know, buddy. Elena and I are trying to figure out how to fix the problems so we can open the school." Tommy was quiet for a moment, then said, "Remember when you taught me to change the oil in your truck? You said sometimes you have to try different approaches until you find one that works." Jake smiled at his son's wisdom. "You're right, Tommy. Maybe Elena and I need to think about this differently." The next morning, Jake called Elena and asked her to meet him at the Institute. When she arrived, he was standing in the outdoor area behind the main building, studying the space with a new perspective. "What if we can't use the automotive bay right now?" Jake said. "What if we start the program differently?" Elena looked confused. "I'm not following you." Jake gestured toward the open area behind the building. "We could set up outdoor workstations, bring in portable lifts, set up basic hand tool stations, start with fundamental maintenance skills that don't require enclosed workspace." Elena's eyes widened as she began to understand his thinking. "Like an outdoor automotive lab?" "Exactly. We could teach oil changes, tire rotation, basic electrical troubleshooting, engine diagnosis, all the foundational skills that every automotive technician needs to know. Insurance wouldn't be an issue for outdoor instruction, and we wouldn't need the upgraded ventilation systems." Elena began pacing, her mind racing through the possibilities. "We could set up canopies for weather protection, bring in roll-around tool cabinets, use vehicles from the local community as training units." Jake nodded enthusiastically. Students would actually get more hands-on experience working on real vehicles with real problems. It might be better than the sterile environment of a traditional shop. Elena stopped pacing and looked at Jake with something approaching awe. This could actually work. And once the indoor facility is ready, we could incorporate both approaches into a comprehensive program. They spent the rest of the day developing their revised plan. Elena contacted equipment suppliers about portable lifts and tool cabinets, while Jake reached out to local car owners who might be willing to bring their vehicles for student training sessions. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with more volunteers than they could accommodate. The modified program launched 2 weeks later with 12 students working at 6 outdoor stations. The setup looked unconventional, but the learning outcomes exceeded everyone's expectations. Students were eager and engaged, working on real automotive problems under Arizona's clear skies. Jake found himself energized by the outdoor teaching environment. Without the constraints of a traditional classroom, he could adapt his instruction to each student's learning style and pace. The hands-on approach fostered creativity and problem-solving skills that might have been harder to develop in a more structured setting. Elena watched the first day of classes from the main building, a smile spreading across her face as she saw students and instructor working together with genuine enthusiasm. This wasn't the program they had originally planned, but it was proving to be something better, a truly innovative approach to automotive education. Tom Martinez from the hardware store stopped by during the second week of classes, curious about the outdoor learning environment. He ended up staying for 2 hours, fascinated by the teaching methods and the students' engagement. "This is remarkable," he told Elena, as they watched Jake demonstrate diagnostic procedures to a group of attentive students. "These kids are learning more in 2 weeks than some mechanics learn in 2 years." Word about the innovative program spread quickly through the region. Educators from other technical schools began visiting, interested in observing the outdoor instruction methods. Several asked Elena about replicating the approach at their own institutions. Jake received a call from Dr. Williams, the school superintendent, who had been interested in establishing partnerships with the institute. "Jake, we've been hearing incredible things about your program. Several of our teachers have asked if they could observe your outdoor classroom methods." "We'd be happy to have them visit," Jake replied. "Actually, I think we're discovering some teaching approaches that could benefit any hands-on education program." As the outdoor program gained momentum, work continued on the indoor facility upgrades. Elena had hired additional contractors to accelerate the timeline, and the electrical and ventilation improvements were nearing completion. But instead of viewing the indoor facility as a replacement for the outdoor program, they began planning ways to integrate both approaches into a comprehensive educational experience. The success of the modified program had an unexpected effect on Elena. The crisis that had initially shaken her confidence had ultimately proven that the Institute could adapt and thrive even when faced with significant obstacles. She began talking about expanding the outdoor learning concept to other trade programs, envisioning a campus where students could learn carpentry, plumbing, and electrical work in real-world environments. Jake noticed other changes in Elena as well. The stress of the opening crisis had brought them closer together, forcing them to rely on each other in ways they hadn't before. She had begun staying at the Plateau house more frequently, not just for convenience, but because she seemed to genuinely enjoy the evening conversations with Jake and Tommy. One evening, as they sat on the front porch watching students pack up their tools after a successful day of classes, Elena made an observation that surprised Jake. "You know," she said, "I think this crisis might have been the best thing that could have happened to us." Jake looked at her with surprise. "How do you figure that?" "Because it forced us to innovate. If everything had gone according to plan, we would have opened a traditional automotive program that looked like every other technical school. Instead, we've created something unique, something that might actually change how people think about vocational education." Jake nodded, understanding her point. "Tommy said something similar when we were dealing with the problems. He reminded me that sometimes you have to try different approaches until you find one that works." Elena smiled. "Smart kid. He gets that from his father." As the weeks passed, the Heritage Skills Institute began attracting attention from beyond the local community. Elena received calls from educational researchers interested in studying their outdoor learning model, and Jake was invited to speak at a conference on innovative teaching methods. The success brought new challenges, however. Demand for the program far exceeded their capacity, and Elena was struggling to balance growth with quality. She and Jake spent long hours discussing how to expand without losing the personal touch that made their program special. The indoor facility finally received its full occupancy permit, just as they were completing their first cohort of students. The graduation ceremony was held on the plateau, with families and community members gathering to celebrate the achievements of 12 individuals who had transformed their career prospects in just 8 weeks. Jake watched with pride as each graduate received their certificate, knowing that they were leaving with both technical skills and the confidence to tackle any challenge their careers might present. Several already had job offers from local businesses, while others were planning to start their own automotive service operations. Elena spoke at the graduation ceremony, acknowledging the unconventional start to their program and thanking the community for their support. The Heritage Skills Institute began with a vision of honoring the past while building for the future, she said. But we've learned that sometimes the best way to honor tradition is to be willing to innovate when circumstances demand it. As the ceremony concluded and families began to head home, Jake found himself standing alone with Elena, watching the sun set over the valley they had come to love. The crisis that had threatened to destroy their dream had instead transformed it into something better than they had originally imagined. "What's next?" Jake asked, knowing that Elena's mind was already working on new possibilities. Elena smiled, looking out over the facility that had become their shared legacy. "I think we're just getting started. We've proven that innovative education can work in small communities. Now we need to figure out how to share that discovery with the rest of the world." Jake nodded, feeling a familiar mixture of excitement and anticipation. They had overcome their greatest challenge and emerged stronger than before. Whatever came next, he was confident they could handle it together. 1 year later, Jake stood in the main office of the Heritage Skills Institute, reviewing applications for their 5th cohort of students. The program had grown beyond anyone's expectations, with a waiting list that stretched 6 months into the future. What had started as a crisis-driven outdoor experiment had evolved into a nationally recognized model for vocational education. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating walls covered with photographs of graduates, letters of appreciation from employers, and newspaper articles about the Institute's innovative approach. Jake paused at a framed photo of their first outdoor graduation ceremony, remembering how uncertain everything had felt just 12 months ago. Elena entered the office carrying 2 cups of coffee and a thick folder of documents. She had just returned from Washington, D.C., where she had presented their outdoor learning model to a congressional committee on rural economic development. The federal government was considering funding similar programs in small communities across the country. "How did the presentation go?" Jake asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. Elena settled into the chair across from his desk, looking both exhausted and exhilarated. "Better than I hoped. 3 different senators want to visit the Institute, and the Department of Education is talking about a pilot program in 12 states. Jake shook his head in amazement. "Sometimes I still can't believe how far this has come. A year ago, we were worried about getting 12 students. Now we're talking about influencing national education policy." Elena smiled, but Jake could see something deeper in her expression. Over the past months, as the Institute's reputation had grown, she had been receiving offers from larger organizations wanting to hire her expertise. Universities were asking her to consult on program development, and several major corporations had approached her about scaling the outdoor learning model nationally. "Jake," Elena said carefully, "I need to talk to you about something important." Jake felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He had been dreading this conversation, knowing it was inevitable, but hoping it wouldn't come so soon. "You've received another offer." Elena nodded. "Stanford University wants me to head up a new center for innovative vocational education. They're offering resources that could help us reach thousands of students instead of hundreds." Jake set down his coffee cup, trying to process what this meant. Elena had become integral to every aspect of the Institute's operation, but more than that, she had become integral to his and Tommy's life. The thought of her leaving felt like losing a piece of his heart. "That sounds like an incredible opportunity," Jake said, though the words felt hollow. "It is," Elena agreed, "but it would mean leaving Arizona, leaving the Institute, leaving..." She didn't finish the sentence, but Jake understood what she meant. Over the past year, their professional partnership had deepened into something more personal. They hadn't formally discussed it, but anyone who saw them together could sense the connection that had developed between them. Tommy chose that moment to burst through the office door, his face bright with excitement. At 9 years old, he had become the Institute's unofficial mascot, helping with small tasks and charming visitors with his enthusiasm for automotive repair. "Dad, Elena, you have to come see what Marcus figured out with the engine diagnostic. Computer!" Marcus Williams was one of their current students, a 19-year-old from Milfield who had struggled in traditional academic settings but excelled in hands-on learning. Jake and Elena followed Tommy to the automotive bay, where they found Marcus explaining a complex diagnostic procedure to several classmates. "The computer said the problem was in the oxygen sensor," Marcus was saying, "but when I tested the actual sensor, it was working fine, so I started thinking about what else could cause the same symptoms." Jake watched with pride as Marcus walked his classmates through his troubleshooting process. This was exactly what they had hoped to achieve. Students who didn't just follow procedures, but understood the underlying principles and could think critically about complex problems. Elena stood beside Jake, observing the lesson with the same pride he felt. "This is what we're really doing here," she said quietly. "We're not just teaching technical skills. We're teaching people to think, to problem solve, to believe in their own capabilities." After the students returned to their projects, Jake and Elena walked outside to the outdoor learning area that had become the Institute's signature feature. The space had evolved significantly since their emergency launch, with permanent canopies, sophisticated tool storage systems, and workstations designed specifically for outdoor instruction. "Elena," Jake said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." Elena looked at him expectantly. "Are you happy here? Really happy? Or are you staying because you feel obligated to the Institute?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the valley where Milfield sat nestled among the desert hills. "I'm happier here than I've ever been anywhere else," she said finally. "But I also feel like I might be limiting my impact by staying in one place." Jake understood the conflict she was facing. Elena had the vision and skills to influence education on a national scale, but scaling up would mean losing the personal connections that made their work meaningful. "What if there was a way to do both?" Jake asked. "What if you could expand your impact without leaving what we've built here?" Elena turned to look at him, curious about where his thoughts were. "Leading. You could accept the Stanford position, but structure it as a partnership with the Heritage Skills Institute. Use this as your laboratory, your proof of concept, while developing programs that could be implemented elsewhere." Elena's eyes widened as she considered the possibilities. A hub and spoke model. "We maintain the Institute as the flagship program, while helping other communities develop their own versions." Jake nodded. "You could spend part of your time at Stanford, part of your time here. The Institute would benefit from the university connection, and Stanford would have access to our real-world results." Elena began pacing, her mind racing through the implications. "It could work. We'd need to hire additional staff here to handle day-to-day operations, but the core programs could continue. And having a university partnership might actually help us access funding for expansion." Jake felt a wave of relief. The solution wasn't perfect, but it offered a path forward that didn't require Elena to choose between her career ambitions and her commitment to their community. That evening, Jake and Elena sat on the front porch of their house, watching Tommy play with Ranger, the golden retriever puppy they had adopted 3 months earlier. Elena had been staying in the guest room so frequently that it had become her permanent residence, though they had never formally discussed the arrangement. "Jake," Elena said, "there's something else we need to talk about." Jake felt his stomach tighten again. "What is it?" Elena turned to face him, her expression serious, but warm. "Over the past year, this place has become more than just a job for me. You and Tommy have become family." Jake felt his heart skip a beat. They had been dancing around their feelings for months, both of them aware of the growing connection, but neither willing to risk disrupting their professional partnership. "Elena," Jake said carefully, "you've become family to us too, but I don't want you to feel like you have to choose between your career and your personal life." Elena reached over and took his hand. "What if I told you that my personal life is exactly what I want to build my career around? What if helping communities like Milfield isn't just my job, but my calling?" Jake looked into her eyes, seeing the sincerity behind her words. "Then I'd say that Tommy and I would be honored to be part of that calling." Elena smiled, and Jake felt something shift between them, a recognition that they were no longer just business partners or friends, but something deeper and more permanent. Tommy looked up from playing with Ranger, noticing the serious conversation happening on the porch. "Are you guys talking about grown-up stuff again?" Elena laughed. "Yes, but it's good grown-up stuff. How would you feel if I stayed here permanently, if I became part of your family officially?" Tommy's face lit up with pure joy. "Really? You'd want to be my stepmom?" Elena glanced at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. "If your dad agrees. And if you'd like that, then yes." Tommy whooped with excitement and ran over to hug both adults. "This is the best day ever." Indeed. 6 months later, Jake stood at the altar of the small church in Milfield, watching Eleanor walk down the aisle in a simple white dress that perfectly suited the desert setting. Tommy served as best man, his face glowing with happiness as he watched his father marry the woman who had transformed their lives. The reception was held at the Heritage Skills Institute, with the entire community of Milfield joining current and former students in celebrating the union. The outdoor learning area had been decorated with lights and flowers, creating a magical atmosphere under the Arizona stars. Dr. Patricia Williams, the school superintendent who had become a close friend and collaborator, offered a toast that captured the essence of what Jake and Elena had built together. "Jake and Elena have shown us that the best partnerships are built on shared values and complementary strengths. They've created something here that goes beyond education or business success. They've built a community." As the evening wound down and guests began to head home, Jake and Elena found themselves alone on the front porch of their house, still wearing their wedding clothes, but feeling completely at ease. Tommy had fallen asleep on the couch inside, exhausted from the excitement of the day. "Mrs. Thompson," Jake said, trying out Elena's new name. Elena smiled. "I like the sound of that." Jake looked out over the valley, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You know, if you had told me 2 years ago that helping a stranded motorist would lead to all this, I never would have believed it." Elena took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Sometimes the most important moments in our lives look completely ordinary when they're happening." Jake nodded, thinking about that day on Highway 47 when everything had started. "Your truck breaking down was the best thing that ever happened to us." Elena laughed softly. "I never did properly thank you for that repair job." "Oh, I think you've more than made up for it," Jake replied, gesturing toward the institute, their home, and the life they had built together. The next morning brought the start of a new chapter in their lives. Elena would be splitting her time between the Heritage Skills Institute and Stanford University, working to develop a national network of community-based vocational programs. Jake would continue as the Institute's director, but with expanded responsibilities as they prepared to help other communities launch similar programs. Tommy, now 10 years old, had become an integral part of the Institute's daily operations. He helped orient new students, assisted with basic maintenance tasks, and served as living proof that children could thrive in environments where practical skills were valued alongside academic achievement. The first replication site for their program was being established in a small town in Montana, where a former mining community was looking for new economic opportunities. Elena and Jake would travel there the following month to help launch their automotive program, the first of what they hoped would be dozens of similar initiatives. As Jake prepared for his morning classes, he received a phone call that brought unexpected news. The caller was a reporter from a national magazine who wanted to write a feature story about the Heritage Skills Institute and its innovative approach to vocational education. "We're particularly interested in the human story behind the program," the reporter explained. "How a chance encounter between a mechanic and a stranded motorist led to a new model for rural education." Jake smiled, thinking about how often he had told that story over the past 2 years. It had become a parable of sorts, illustrating how small acts of kindness could have profound and far-reaching consequences. After hanging up with the reporter, Jake walked outside to find Elena setting up equipment for the day's outdoor classes. She moved with the confidence of someone who had found her true calling, organizing tools and materials with the same attention to detail she had once applied to real estate development. "Busy day ahead?" Jake asked, joining her at one of the workstations. "The best kind of busy," Elena replied. "We have 12 new students starting today, plus a delegation from Colorado visiting to observe our teaching methods." Jake looked around at the facility they had built together, marveling at how something that had started as an emergency solution had become a model for innovation in education. Students were beginning to arrive for the morning session, their faces showing the mixture of nervousness and excitement that Jake had come to recognize in every new cohort. Marcus Williams, now a certified automotive technician working at a dealership in Phoenix, had returned to serve as a guest instructor for the new students. His success story had become one of many that demonstrated the transformative power of hands-on education combined with genuine care and attention. "Marcus," Jake called out as the young man set up his teaching materials, "how does it feel to be on the other side of the classroom?" Marcus grinned. "Scary but exciting. I keep thinking about how nervous I was when I started here and how you and Elena made me believe I could actually learn this stuff." Elena overheard the conversation and approached the two men. "Marcus, you succeeded because you were willing to work hard and think creatively. We just provided the environment and the encouragement." "Maybe," Marcus replied, "but you also provided something else. You made me feel like I mattered, like my success was important to you personally. That made all the difference." As the morning classes began, Jake found himself reflecting on Marcus's words. The technical skills they taught at the Institute were important, but the real transformation happened when students began to believe in their own potential. That belief was something that couldn't be programmed into a curriculum or measured on a standardized test, but it was the most valuable thing they offered. Elena had moved to the main building to meet with the Colorado delegation, leaving Jake to oversee the outdoor instruction. He watched as new students worked alongside returning participants, learning not just from their instructors but from each other. The collaborative atmosphere was exactly what he had hoped to create when they first began developing the program. During the lunch break, Jake received a text message from Tommy, who was at school but checking in on the Institute's activities. "How are the new students doing? Tell Marcus I said hi." Jake smiled at his son's continued investment in the program's success. Tommy had grown up alongside the Institute, and it had shaped his understanding of what education could be. He excelled in traditional academic subjects, but also had practical skills that most children his age lacked. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor, Gerald Murphy, the county building inspector whose code violation report had nearly derailed their opening 2 years earlier. Murphy had become a supporter of the Institute, often referring young people to their programs and praising their innovative approach to safety training. "Jake," Murphy said, approaching him near the outdoor workstations, "I wanted to let you know that the state is considering adopting some of your safety protocols as standard practice for vocational programs." Jake felt a surge of pride. The safety measures they had developed out of necessity had proven to be more effective than traditional classroom approaches. Students who learned safety concepts while actually performing tasks retained the information better and applied it more consistently. "That's great news, Gerald. We'd be happy to share our protocols with other programs." Murphy nodded. "You've built something special here. When I first saw your outdoor setup, I thought it was crazy. Now I think it might be the future of hands-on education." As the day drew to a close, Jake found Elena in their shared office, reviewing applications for the next cohort and planning curriculum improvements. She looked up as he entered, her face showing the satisfaction that came from a day well spent. "How did the new students do?" she asked. "Better than expected. 3 of them already have some automotive experience, and they're helping the complete beginners. It's creating exactly the kind of peer learning environment we hoped for." Elena smiled. "And how did Marcus do as an instructor?" "Natural teacher. He has the technical knowledge, but more importantly, he remembers what it was like to be struggling and uncertain. That empathy makes him incredibly effective." Elena closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. "Jake, sometimes I still don't believe what we've accomplished here. 2 years ago, I was just someone with inherited land and no clear purpose. Now we're influencing education policy and changing lives." Jake sat down across from her, thinking about the transformation they had both undergone. "You know what I think made the difference? We started with the right motivation. It was never about building a successful business or making money. It was about helping people and serving our community." Elena nodded. "And we were willing to adapt when our original plans didn't work. If we had stuck rigidly to the indoor classroom model, we never would have discovered how powerful outdoor learning could be." As they prepared to leave for the day, Jake reflected on the lessons they had learned through building the Heritage Skills Institute. Success hadn't come from having perfect plans or unlimited resources. It had come from genuine care for their students, willingness to innovate when faced with challenges, and the strength they drew from their partnership. Tommy was waiting for them at home, eager to hear about the day's activities and share news. From his own school, at 10 years old, he'd developed into a confident, curious child who moved easily between the worlds of traditional academics and practical skills. "Dad, Elena," Tommy said over dinner, "my teacher wants to bring our whole class to visit the Institute next month. She thinks it would help the other kids understand different kinds of careers." Elena and Jake exchanged glances, both thinking about how the Institute had become a resource, not just for vocational training, but for broadening young people's understanding of the possibilities available to them. "That sounds like a great idea," Elena replied. "We could set up some demonstrations and let the students try some basic automotive tasks." Tommy grinned. "Can I help lead the tour? I know all the equipment, and I can explain how everything works." Jake laughed at his son's eagerness. "I think you'd make an excellent tour guide." As the evening settled over the plateau, Jake and Elena sat on their front porch, watching the lights of Milfield twinkle in the valley below. The Heritage Skills Institute sat quietly beside their home, ready for another day of transforming lives and building futures. Elena, Jake said, do you ever think about what your grandfather would say if he could see what we've built here? Elena considered the question thoughtfully. I think he'd be amazed that his old property became the foundation for something that's helping so many people. But I also think he'd understand it. He was always someone who believed in the value of hard work and practical skills. Jake nodded, thinking about the legacy they were creating together. The Heritage Skills Institute had grown far beyond what any of them had originally envisioned, but it remained true to the values that had inspired its creation: community, education, and the belief that everyone deserved the opportunity to build a meaningful life. The story that had begun with a broken-down truck on a desert highway had become something larger than any of them could have imagined. It had become a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of community, and the extraordinary things that could happen when people chose to help each other rather than walk away. As Jake and Elena headed inside for the evening, they knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. But they also knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, supported by the community they had helped build and inspired by the belief that their best days were still ahead of them. 5 years had passed since that fateful morning, when Jake Thompson first spotted a broken-down truck on Highway 47. The Heritage Skills Institute had become a beacon of hope across the American Southwest, with 17 satellite programs operating in communities from New Mexico to Nevada. What had started as one man's simple act of kindness had grown into a movement that was reshaping how rural America approached economic development and education. Elena stood before a packed auditorium at the National Conference on Rural Economic Development, delivering the keynote address to an audience of mayors, educators, and community leaders from across the country. Her presentation, titled "Building Bridges: How One Community Transformed Economic Despair into Sustainable Prosperity," chronicled the journey from that first emergency repair to a thriving network of community-based learning centers. The audience was captivated by Elena's storytelling, particularly when she shared the photograph that had become iconic in rural development circles. Jake and Tommy working side by side under the desert sun during those first outdoor classes. Their faces lit with the joy of discovery and shared purpose. The image had been featured on magazine covers and in textbooks, symbolizing the power of innovative thinking and community partnership. Meanwhile, back in Arizona, Jake was leading a very different kind of presentation. The main automotive bay at the Heritage Skills Institute buzzed with activity as he guided a group of visiting dignitaries through the facility. The delegation included the Secretary of Education, 2 senators, and representatives from major automotive manufacturers who were considering partnerships with the Institute's training programs. Tommy, now 15 and already showing remarkable mechanical aptitude, served as Jake's co-presenter. The teenager moved confidently between workstations, explaining complex diagnostic procedures to visitors who were amazed by his depth of knowledge and natural teaching ability. He had inherited his father's gift for making complicated concepts accessible to others. This diagnostic system, Tommy explained to the Secretary of Education, integrates traditional mechanical troubleshooting with cutting-edge computer analysis. Students learn to think critically about problems rather than just following predetermined procedures. The secretary nodded approvingly, making notes on her tablet. This kind of critical thinking preparation is exactly what we need in technical education. Too many programs focus on rote memorization instead of problem-solving skills. Jake watched his son with profound pride, remembering the nervous 8-year-old who had once asked endless questions about car engines. Tommy had grown into a confident young man who bridged the worlds of traditional craftsmanship and modern technology with remarkable ease. After the delegation departed, Jake and Tommy walked through the expanded facility that now encompassed 12 buildings spread across the plateau. The original outdoor learning area had been preserved and enhanced, serving as the philosophical heart of the institute, while newer indoor facilities provided controlled environments for advanced training. The woodworking shop hummed with the sound of sanders and saws as students crafted furniture that would be sold in galleries across the region. The electrical training center featured smart home technology that prepared students for the growing field of residential automation. The culinary arts program operated a restaurant that had become a destination for food enthusiasts from Phoenix and beyond. But it was the automotive program that remained the Institute's flagship, attracting students from around the world who wanted to experience the innovative outdoor learning methodology that had revolutionized technical education. The waiting list for admission stretched over a year, with applications coming from as far away as Europe and Asia. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Presentation went perfectly. Flying home tonight. Can't wait to see you and Tommy. Jake smiled, looking forward to Elena's return. Her work at Stanford and her consulting with communities across the country kept her traveling frequently, but she always returned to the plateau with new ideas and renewed energy for their shared mission. That evening, as Jake and Tommy prepared dinner in their expanded kitchen, they reflected on the day's visit from the federal delegation. The Secretary of Education had been particularly interested in the Institute's job placement rates, which exceeded 90% for program graduates. "Dad," Tommy said as he chopped vegetables for their salad, "do you think Mom would be proud of what we've built here?" Jake paused in his work, feeling the familiar tightness in his throat that always accompanied thoughts of Sarah. Even after all these years, her memory remained vivid and precious. "I think your mom would be amazed, Tommy. She always believed in helping others, and she would love seeing how many lives we've been able to touch." Tommy nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about her a lot lately, especially when I see how happy you and Elena are together." Jake looked at his son, hearing something new in his voice. "What's on your mind, buddy?" Tommy set down his knife and turned to face his father. "I want you to know that I'm grateful for Elena. She didn't just become my stepmom, she became my friend, and I think she helped you become happy again." Jake felt his eyes well up with emotion. At 15, Tommy had developed a wisdom and emotional intelligence that sometimes surprised him. "Elena has been a blessing for both of us, but you know what made the biggest difference in my life?" Tommy shook his head. "You did. Being your father, watching you grow and learn, seeing the world through your eyes. That's what taught me how to be happy again. Elena just helped me realize it." Elena arrived home just as they were finishing dinner, her face glowing with excitement from her successful presentation. She had news that would reshape their understanding of what they had accomplished together. "The federal government wants to fund a national pilot program based on our model," Elena announced as she joined them at the dinner table. $50 million over 5 years to establish community learning centers in rural areas across the country. Jake nearly choked on his water. $50 million, Elena nodded enthusiastically. The Secretary of Education was so impressed by today's visit that she fast-tracked the proposal. "We're talking about transforming economic development in hundreds of small communities." Tommy's eyes widened. "Does that mean you'll be traveling even more?" Elena reached over and squeezed Tommy's hand. "Actually, it means the opposite. The federal program would be headquartered here at the Heritage Skills Institute. We'd be hiring dozens of staff members to coordinate the national network." Jake felt a surge of excitement mixed with trepidation. The opportunity was incredible, but it also represented a level of responsibility that seemed almost overwhelming. "Elena, are we ready for something that big?" Elena smiled, the same confident expression he had seen when she first proposed the institute. "Jake, 5 years ago, you were worried about teaching 12 students in an outdoor classroom. Now you're recognized as one of the leading innovators in vocational education. If we can handle that transformation, we can handle anything." Over the following weeks, the plateau became a hub of intense activity as Elena and Jake worked with federal officials to design the national expansion program. Teams of architects, educators, and economists descended on the institute to study every aspect of their operation and develop replication protocols. The most challenging aspect of the expansion was maintaining the personal touch that made their program effective. Each community would need to adapt the model to local conditions and needs, while preserving the core principles of hands-on learning, community partnership, and individual attention. Jake found himself at the center of curriculum development efforts, working with educators from across the country to create training materials that could be used by instructors who had never taught in outdoor environments. The work was demanding but exhilarating, as he saw his ideas being refined and adapted for implementation on a national scale. Tommy had become an integral part of the planning process, offering insights from the student perspective that proved invaluable. His suggestion to create peer mentorship programs was adopted as a standard feature of all new sites, recognizing the power of student-to-student learning that had emerged naturally at the original institute. The media attention surrounding the federal program brought unexpected visitors to the plateau. Documentary filmmakers wanted to capture the institute's story, researchers sought access to their outcomes data, and politicians made pilgrimages to see firsthand what effective rural development looked like. Jake found the attention overwhelming at times, preferring the quiet satisfaction of working with individual students to the glare of national spotlight. But Elena helped him understand that their visibility was essential for spreading their message and inspiring other communities to invest in similar programs. One afternoon, while Jake was teaching a group of visitors from rural Montana how to set up outdoor learning stations, he received a phone call that changed his perspective on their growing influence. The caller was Maria Santos, a single mother from Texas, whose son had graduated from one of their satellite programs. "Mr. Thompson," Maria said, her voice filled with emotion, "I wanted to thank you for what you've done for my family. My son Diego was failing in high school, getting into trouble, heading down a bad path. Your program in El Paso saved his life." Jake listened as Maria described Diego's transformation from a struggling teenager to a confident young man who now owned his own automotive repair business. The story was similar to dozens of others he had heard over the years, but it never lost its power to move him. "Diego wants to open a satellite program in our hometown," Maria continued. "He says he wants to help other kids the way you helped him. Would you be willing to meet with him?" Jake felt a familiar warmth spreading through his chest. This was why they did the work. Not for recognition or federal funding, but for the Diego Santos of the world, who needed someone to believe in their potential. "I'd be honored to meet with Diego," Jake replied. "Have him call me directly." That evening, Jake shared the phone call with Elena and Tommy over dinner. Elena's eyes lit up as she realized the implications of Diego's story. "This is exactly what we hoped would happen," she said. "Program graduates becoming program leaders, spreading the model organically through their own communities." Tommy nodded enthusiastically. "It's like ripples in a pond. Every person we help goes out and helps other people." Jake marveled at his son's ability to distill complex concepts into simple truths. The ripple effect Tommy described was indeed what they were witnessing. a spreading wave of community transformation that began with individual lives changed and extended outward through families, neighborhoods, and entire regions. 6 months later, Jake stood on the stage of the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., accepting the Presidential Medal for Community Service on behalf of the Heritage Skills Institute. Elena and Tommy sat in the front row, their faces glowing with pride as the president described their work's impact on rural America. The Heritage Skills Institute represents the best of American ingenuity and community spirit, the president said as he placed the medal around Jake's neck. Through their innovative approach to education and economic development, they have proven that small communities can thrive in the modern economy while preserving their unique character and values. Jake felt overwhelmed by the honor, but also humbled by the recognition. In his acceptance speech, he made sure to acknowledge the hundreds of students, instructors, and community partners who had made their success possible. This medal belongs to every person who believed that education should be about more than test scores, that economic development should strengthen communities rather than replace them, and that everyone deserves the opportunity to build a meaningful life. Jake said, looking out at an audience that included many of their program graduates. After the ceremony, Jake, Elena, and Tommy walked through the streets of Washington, marveling at how far they had traveled from that desert highway where their story began. But despite the grandeur of their surroundings, all three were eager to return home to the plateau where their real work continued. The flight back to Arizona gave them time to reflect on the ceremony and plan for the future. The federal program was now fully operational, with new sites opening every month. The Heritage Skills Institute had become the training ground for directors of other programs, with a 6-month fellowship program that brought community leaders from across the country to learn their methods. Jake, Elena said as they flew over the familiar landscape of the Southwest, "Do you ever miss the simplicity of those early days, when it was just us, 12 students, and some basic tools?" Jake considered the question carefully. "I miss the intimacy of it sometimes, but I love seeing the impact we're having on so many more lives, and I think we've managed to preserve what made those early days special." Tommy looked up from the book he was reading. What made them special was that you cared about each person individually. That's what makes the difference now, too. Elena smiled at Tommy's insight. "You're right. The scale has changed, but the heart of what we do remains the same." Upon their return to the plateau, they found the institute bustling with its usual activity. The current cohort of students was preparing for their graduation ceremony, scheduled for the following week. Jake looked forward to these celebrations, which had become opportunities for the entire community to come together and recognize individual achievement. This particular graduation would be special because it included the Institute's 1,000th graduate, a milestone that represented not just numerical achievement, but the transformation of countless lives and communities. Local media had planned extensive coverage, and delegations from several states would be attending to learn about replicating similar programs. Jake spent the week before graduation conducting final evaluations with students, assessing not just their technical skills, but their readiness to enter the workforce with confidence and purpose. Each conversation reminded him why he had fallen in love with teaching, the moment when students realized they possessed capabilities they never knew they had. Elena worked with the Institute's expanded administrative staff to coordinate the graduation logistics while also preparing for the announcement of 3 new satellite programs that would open in the fall. The demand for their services continued to exceed their capacity to expand, a challenge they welcomed as evidence of their program's effectiveness. Tommy had been selected to deliver the student welcome address at graduation, representing the second generation of the Institute family. His speech, which he had written and revised multiple times, focused on the idea that education was not about preparing for a predetermined future, but about developing the skills and confidence to create the future you wanted. The graduation ceremony took place on a perfect desert evening, with the sun setting behind the mountains as families and community members gathered on the plateau. The outdoor venue, which had once been born of necessity, had become a symbol of the Institute's commitment to breaking down barriers between learning and life. Jake watched from the side of the stage as Tommy delivered his address, speaking with poise and conviction about the power of hands-on learning and community support. The teenager's words resonated with the audience, many of whom had watched him grow up alongside the Institute. "The Heritage Skills Institute taught me that learning never stops," Tommy said, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "Every day brings new challenges and new opportunities to grow. The technical skills we learn here are important, but the confidence and curiosity we develop are what will carry us through life." Elena leaned over to Jake as Tommy concluded his remarks. "He's going to be an incredible teacher someday." Jake nodded, knowing that his son had found his calling just as he had found his own. The next generation of the Institute's leadership was already emerging, ready to carry forward the mission of transforming lives through innovative education. The ceremony culminated with the recognition of their 1,000th graduate, a young woman named Elena Rodriguez, who had overcome significant personal challenges to complete the automotive program. Ashley's story embodied the Institute's mission, providing second chances, building confidence, and creating pathways to prosperity for people who might otherwise be overlooked. As Ashley received her certificate, Jake reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. A simple act of roadside assistance had evolved into a movement that was reshaping rural America, one student and one community at a time. After the ceremony, as families and graduates mingled under the desert stars, Jake found himself standing alone at the edge of the plateau, looking out over the valley where Milfield's lights twinkled in the distance. The town had thrived alongside the Institute, with new businesses, improved infrastructure, and a renewed sense of optimism about the future. Elena joined him at the overlook, slipping her hand into his as they shared a moment of quiet satisfaction. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Jake smiled, feeling the contentment that came from a life lived with purpose. "I'm thinking about that morning when I saw your truck broken down on the highway. I almost didn't stop." Elena looked at him with surprise. "Really? Why?" "I was running late, and Tommy was antsy, and I was thinking about all the things I needed to get done that day." Jake shook his head at his younger self's priorities. "If I had driven past, none of this would have happened." Elena squeezed his hand. "But you did stop, and that choice to help a stranger changed everything." Tommy approached them, still energized from his successful speech. "Dad, Elena, people are asking about tours of the facility tomorrow. Should I add them to the schedule?" Jake laughed at his son's assumption of responsibility. "Yes, Tommy, add them to the schedule." As they walked back toward the celebration, Jake marveled at how the simple decision to help someone in need had created ripples that continued to expand outward, touching lives and transforming communities in ways he never could have imagined. The Heritage Skills Institute represented more than educational innovation or economic development. It was a testament to the power of human connection, the importance of community, and the extraordinary things that could happen when people chose kindness over indifference. Under the brilliant canopy of desert stars, surrounded by the laughter and conversation of graduates and their families, Jake Thompson understood that he had found his life's purpose in the most unexpected way. A broken-down truck had led to a transformed life, and that transformed life had become the foundation for transforming countless others. The story that began with a simple repair job had become a legacy of hope, proving that sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin with a single decision to stop and help a stranger on the side of the road. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.